Welcome to another edition of CHP Talks. We are here today with Member of Parliament Cathay Wagantall, and we're going to be talking about the sex-selective abortion bill that she's bringing before Parliament. So, Rod, why don't you give our special guest for today a proper introduction?
Well, Cathay, we're so pleased to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Businesswoman and administrator Cathay Wagantall was first elected in 2015 as a member of Parliament for Yorkton-Melville, Saskatchewan, for the Conservative Party of Canada, and she was re-elected, which is backed by popular demand, in 2019. In her parliamentary work, Cathay has been committed to standing up for the most vulnerable in society, working to defend and protect fundamental rights such as freedom of conscience, religion, belief, and expression. She's a member of the Interparliamentary Committee on Ending Human Trafficking in Canada, as well as a member of the Parliamentary Pro-Life Caucus. In her first year as Member of Parliament, she tabled a private member's bill entitled Cassie and Molly's Law, which sought to protect mothers and their preborn children. She recently introduced her second private member's bill, the Sex-Selective Abortion Act, that's C-233, which would make it an offense for a medical practitioner to perform an abortion knowing that the abortion is sought solely on the grounds of the child's sex. Cathay is passionate about building community among believers and taking action for the persecuted church. In 2019, she became chair of Canada's National Prayer Breakfast. That's a tremendous annual event I've had the privilege of attending several times. And Cathay and her husband, Marty, have been married for 44 years. They have 3 married children and 10 grandchildren. Together, they planted and pastored churches in Lloydminster, Saskatchewan, Edmonton, Alberta. And Cathay is dedicated to serving the Lord and the people of Canada. And we're grateful to have you with us today, Cathay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rod. It means a great deal to be able to be here with you today. Thanks.
Well, I guess the question that so many will probably ask is, how did you get involved in politics in the first place? What drove you in that direction?
Thanks, Peter. Actually, it started with a tiny little seed when I was in grade 6, which happened to be Canada's centennial year. And at my school, we got a wonderful booklet about Canada and government and how it all worked, as well as a gold edition of a Gideon New Testament. Back then in the day, New Testaments were handed out to schools when you were in grade 6. So I got really passionate about my country and thought, wouldn't it be something to someday go to Ottawa and serve there? Well, that was many, many moons ago. I cut my teeth actually on politics in 2004 when the two Canadian Alliance and the Reform came together and just decided it was time. I had an opportunity to serve on a brand new board, and my kids were grown and all off to university. So I decided to take a crack at all of this then. And I am an experiential learner. So I just did every job that I could take on over time to learn the ins and outs of things, and ended up being asked by Mike Lake, who won the nomination after my being involved for a while, and asked me if I would like to be his campaign manager. And that's when I started to really realize for sure that, you know, if you want to, in this country, you can let your name stand and you can work really hard and possibly end up being a member of Parliament. So I did run in Edmonton, and in that nomination race, I lost by 4 votes on the first ballot, and the individual who won by 2 votes on the second. So a very, very tight race. And that's when I realized, wow, you know, every vote counts. I knew that, but I really experienced it. And then we moved home when my dad got very ill. My husband felt we needed to leave ministry and come home and assist them. And believe it or not, that was a decade ago. And I did run again in 2015 in Saskatchewan and had the privilege of becoming a member of Parliament.
So when you became a member of Parliament, one of the first things that you had the opportunity of doing was introducing a private member's bill, correct?
Right. Yes. You know, I don't know if folks understand, but every time there's a new government, all of the names of the members of Parliament go into a hat, other than ministers and parliamentary secretaries, and your names are pulled. And in the order they're pulled, you have an opportunity to present a private member's bill during that sitting Now, if you're polled number 150 to 200, 250, chances are you're never going to get to actually present. So there are people that have, sat in this house for a very long time, even 10, 15 years, and never had this opportunity. And I had the opportunity as a brand new member, being polled number 11. And so I put forward Cassie and Molly's Law.
Yeah. Do you want to describe that bill a little bit? It's past
Sure.
history now, but it was a great bill, and just let people know what that was about.
Sure. And, it is past history in that it did not pass in the House, but it really opened up conversation around pregnant women and their preborn children. It was a public safety bill in that if a woman was attacked by a third party who knew that she was pregnant and she was fully intending to carry that baby to term, and that child was injured or killed, that it would provide a second offense in regards to the mother. Because when Jeff lost Cassie, his partner, she was expecting Molly at 7 months, totally viable baby. And they weren't together anymore, but they lived a block apart. They were excited about this little girl, and she was brutally killed. And of course, Molly's life was taken as well. And that's when Jeff realized that there was no recognition in our criminal code for that child. And so that's when he created Cassie and Molly Matters, is his website. So we got together, and I had an opportunity to push this issue because it's a gap in our criminal code that does not protect a woman's right to carry her child to term.
Yeah. Well, much like the bill that you're presenting now, which you're going to be speaking about in a minute, Bill C-233, this bill, it always surprises me that the whole House doesn't get behind it, because this is protecting a woman's right to choose to have a child, right? Cassie Molly's Law, this woman was planning to carry her child to birth. And so that dream was cut off, not only for her husband, and the child. So, it's just the fact that it involves the killing of a preborn, that it seems like the other, so many parliamentarians are afraid to touch the subject. But thank you for not being afraid to touch it.
Oh, well, Rod, I have to say that in that case, what it did is woke up Canadians across the country again to the fact that this was happening. And I think the fact that there's social media now really let it spread more than it had in the past. And, people were going, wait a minute, we even make an effort in a car crash to try and save that baby's life, but yet we're not recognizing its value. And every time a circumstance would come up like that, people would send me tweets or Facebook posts and say, did you see this? Did you know this? And it started to really open up a conversation for me, specifically actually around the topic of my second bill.
Okay. And so I guess that leads the conversation again to 2019, another election and another opportunity for another private member's bill. Where were you in the order, and tell us about the bill, please?
Sure. I think I was number 35 originally. And then the Prime Minister had not chosen all of his ministers and parliamentary secretaries yet. So it bumped me down to 31, which meant I wasn't in that first group of 30, but then I was in the second one. And they only deal with 15 at a time. And of course, it goes through first reading, first hour of debate, second reading, second hour of debate, and then hopefully passes and goes to committee. And then from committee comes back to the House to be voted on as to whether or not it would pass into legislation. So I had an opportunity again, and of course the House prorogued, and all kinds of things have really slowed down the effectiveness of this Parliament. But it did stay, one thing about private members' bills is they, when Parliament is prorogued, they don't fall off the order paper. So fortunately it stayed on. And now I have the opportunity to debate it in the House. Next Wednesday is my first hour of debate.
Well, we're really looking forward to that. We will be following that very closely, and kind of wondering what kind of coverage you're getting from the national media on this bill. I mean, it's a tremendously important bill. And I would hope that you would be getting, the kind of exciting coverage from CBC and CTV that you should be. What's been your experience?
Well, the interesting thing is when I decided to do this, it was because of what came out of Cathay and Molly's Law. Whenever I would do trade shows, and I would have a fairly big one in Yorkton, and I would always carry 3 petitions with me. One is on firearms, one is on sex selection abortion, which this bill is about, and the third one is on palliative care. And so people would come and talk to me about Cathay and Molly's Law, and they'd say, well, you have this about sex selection. I want abortion to be available in Canada. And I would say, okay, well, that's, your preference. So are you okay then with sex selection abortion? And they would just look at me like, what's wrong with you? Of course not. And I would say, well, partial birth, late term. And they'd say, no, you can only have an abortion in Canada in the first trimester. And then, of course, I would educate them on the fact that Canada has absolutely no laws, no parameters. And it would honestly, even nurses, I can remember one scenario where they honestly felt nauseous when they realized that was the case, and they would sign this petition. And so I thought that was the direction I was going to go. And as I released it on the order paper, the National Post printed a poll that showed basically what they said is that Canadians are not polarized on this issue the way a lot of times mainstream media and especially political parties want us to think we are polarized on. And so that was a real door opener for me. And at this point in time, as far as exposure to the media, I've been doing press releases and whatnot, but I am having an opportunity to interact with them next week is the plan.
Very good, very good. Well, this bill deserves certainly the support of every member of the House, and it deserves, the attention of the media. And like you say, the Canadian public is largely unaware of, some of the, there really isn't much law at all surrounding abortion. And I think most Canadians think that there is.
Well, and what this poll showed was that the majority of Canadians want access to abortion. But then as it got into deeper issues around that, and if the question was asked, do you agree with sex selection abortion being available when the family wants the child to be a certain sex? And 84% of Canadians said this should not be possible in Canada, that this should be illegal. And so that really gives me the credence to be able to say, I'm not trying to push this issue. It's Canadians that are already saying this is something important to them. And as legislators, it's our responsibility to have these conversations and to represent them in the House. So that's the plan.
And in terms of the House, have you been receiving any sort of support, any sort of feedback from the parties, or even from the governing party at this time?
The majority of the response has been through the petitions, the paper petitions that we've been presenting in the House. And I can't stress enough how important it is to do these things as Canadians, because it makes a difference. So my petition is in a paper form, and every time you have 25 signatures, you can stand up in the House and present that petition. So, of course, when I first began in Parliament, I thought the more names you presented at once, the better. But of course, it's better to split it out. And then many of my colleagues have been able to stand up in the House as well and present that petition to the House. And then basically, every time it's presented, the Minister of Justice has to respond because it's in regards to protecting baby girls from sex selection abortion. And I would just like to read to you what the Minister of Justice, David Lametti, wrote in response to that petition. And I'm going to read it just so I quote him correctly. Yep. The Government of Canada condemns all practices that are motivated by discriminatory views of women and girls, including sex-selective practices.
Wow.
So that's his response. And that's appropriate because, of course, our government and as Canadians, we value human rights and equality between men and women. And so obviously, when you have a case where baby girls are being targeted, then that is not equality at the earliest stages of life. And so in Canada, a lot of people don't realize that we do already have one law in regards to sex selection. And that is in regards to in vitro fertilization, where you are not allowed, it is illegal to choose that embryo based on the genetic sex of the embryo. And of course, science has come so far from when abortion became an issue in the beginning, where we know that we can determine the sex of that baby, the genetic sex, at the moment of conception. So this was his response. He did go on to say, in Canada, the administration and funding of healthcare services is a provincial responsibility that falls under the purview of the provincial governments. As is the case for other medical procedures, the delivery of abortion services is determined by the policies of the provincial governments and the standards set by the medical profession itself. So this sounds very much like we're going to just punt this down to the provinces and not have to deal with it. However, this government has made a point of dealing with a lot of issues that are provincially related, everything from medical suicide and conversion therapy and giving directives on those health issues. So we won't take that as an excuse. And actually, the Canadian Medical Association, on the basis of 2 studies that it had done and reported in the medical journal, have indicated that this is a growing problem in Canada. So right there, there's a response from the Medical Association, and the executive of the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada have made a statement that medical technologies for the purpose of gender identification in pregnancy should not be used for societal preferences, and that they do not support termination of pregnancy on the basis of gender. So clearly, you know, our medical systems are saying they do not agree with this, but it's not their job to create laws, right? And so obviously the provinces have a role to play, but our federal government needs to do its job. And the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Ontario, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan have all echoed the views of the obstetricians and gynecologists of Canada. So we have a premise here on the basis of the majority of Canadians and our medical associations to do this as a federal government and to make it illegal for sex selections, abortions to take place in Canada.
Well,
So in the meantime, we're listening to this, and it's so great to hear you talk about this support. And just for the sake of our listeners and viewers, it will be debated on April 14th. And so what's the hope after that, and what should we be trying to do before that?
Okay, so that's the first hour of debate. We get 2 hours of debate, but they're spread out based on 15 different bills coming forward at the same time. So I'm still very hopeful that it will come up for second reading before a federal election. That is the kind of up in the air moment that we're in right now. But certainly I do hope to have that second hour of debate and then send it to committee to be studied. So there are many things that Canadians can continue to do. If you go to my website, which is cathaywagantall.ca, and my name is Cathay, so there's an extra A in there, and then Wagantall is all A's.ca. So cathaywagantall.ca. A lot of information about the bill, news releases, the polls that have been done. It's all there for you to use to talk with people about the importance of letting your members of parliament know that you want them to support the bill when it comes up again. Now, if it doesn't come up again before the election, then people are even more aware of how important it is that they elect a government that will allow this kind of conversation to take place. And right now, the Conservative Party of Canada is the only party that would allow me to run in a nomination and allow me to bring this bill forward. So that's important to note. And I know that the other parties are starting to really feel the pressure of the fact that the majority of Canadians want this, and that it flies in the face of supposed feminism and valuing men and women, boys and girls equally. So please, you can sign the petition. There's a paper copy on my website. And then there's also the address for the electronic petition. And that's different in that you try to get as many signatures as possible to show the weight of the importance across the country. And you can sign a paper one as well as the electronic one. The electronic one does not keep your personal information. So it is stored safely within the House of Commons. And then once it is presented in the House, all of that information is destroyed. So that is something that people need to know. They sometimes are apprehensive about doing that type of thing, but it is very well organized, and it's very clear that it does not go past that particular petition. But that one, sorry, Rod, I'll just mention the electronic one, E-3161, is only available until April 9th. So if you haven't signed it by the end of April 9th, you will not be able to do that. So I just encourage people to continue to do that. We're close to 8,000 signatures right now, I believe.
Yeah, very good. Now, that's what I was just going to bring up, is the date that people have to get with it. If you haven't signed it already,
Yes.
all of our audience, please go to cathayWagantall.ca and get on this electronic petition and sign it. Your voice, your vote, and your signature make a difference.
If you just Google e-petitions, House of Commons, it will bring them all up, and you can see mine there as well.
Very good, very good. And of course, I just wanted to make one, of course, when you said that the Conservative Party is the only one that would allow you to run, you mean of the parties currently represented in the House?
In the government, in the House of Commons, that's correct. That's correct.
Because the Christian Heritage Party, of course, would be happy
That's
to have people like you running. And you're a fantastic member of Parliament. We're so grateful that you are serving your constituents and the preborn constituents of across this great nation. And we are so supportive of what you're doing. We really appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. You are making a difference, and you're setting an example for others who also will make a difference in the future. So thank you, Cathay.
Thank you, Rod and Peter. Appreciate it.
And yes. If you had any time left, I'd want you to talk about the issue of trafficking, which I just learned that you're part of that committee, but I know our time is running short.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been a lot of movement on that particular file, and thanks a lot to Arnold Beerson and his office.
Yeah.
But we are pushing it more in the House, and it's just frightening, and this is something that as a society we have got to get a handle on. And of course, the availability of these types of services online is just absolutely frightening. And so I'm really pleased that the government really is feeling pressured to do something far more significant in regards to that.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, and thank you. You've been very generous with your time. We so much appreciate it, and God bless you and yours as you carry on with this important work.
You as well. Thank you so much.
So again, in closing, go to Cathay Wagantall. Yes.
Sorry,
we're talking over each other, but CathatayWagantall.ca. Thank you again, Cathay. Thank you all for listening, and we hope you'll join us again next week for another edition of CHP Talks.